The XAI team was there to unveil Grok 4.
Grok 4, Grok 4.
Grok 4. Sound what? Grok.
This is the latest artificial intelligence system. We are now at the crossroads where promise and peril are going to collide.
Elon Musk's AI was instructed to analyze the Bible as code, and it immediately detected patterns that should not exist in ancient writing. It found memory structures identical to real eyewitness reports. It found trauma sequences that match modern neuroscience and growth patterns used in biological systems. When the team tied all these findings together, they reached a shocking conclusion: the human memory patterns. The investigation began when researchers programmed Grok to analyze the Bible purely as data structure. The team instructed it to ignore beliefs, religious teachings, and emotional reactions that humans usually attach to the Bible. They told it to analyze the structure of the text the same way it examines source code. Grok scanned the 4 Gospels with pattern detection tools that are normally used to find logic errors in software. The team expected Grok to list mistakes. They expected broken patterns and structural weakness. Instead, Grok returned a shocking result. It said the structure of the Gospels matches the way the human brain records events. The team asked Grok to explain what it meant. Grok showed a breakdown of the narrative flow and pattern density. The system compared these patterns to massive data sets of witness statements, police reports, military debriefings, and trauma logs. These data sets taught Grok how real memory behaves. Human memory does not produce identical reports. Real witnesses always disagree on small details because the brain records events in fragments. Grok said the Gospels follow this same structure. Grok explained that human memory is episodic. Episodic memory means the brain saves experiences in pieces. These pieces include images, emotions, fears, sounds, and reactions. When a person retells an event, the brain rebuilds these pieces into a story. This process creates natural differences between witnesses. 2 people can watch the same event and remember different details. This is not a flaw. It is how the brain works. Grok said the differences in the Gospels show this same pattern. The team saw this clearly when Grok examined the resurrection accounts in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Each writer lists different women at the tomb. Matthew names Mary Magdalene and the other Mary. Mark names Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome. Luke adds Joanna and other unnamed women. John mentions only Mary Magdalene. Each account also records different reactions. Some describe fear, others describe shock, and John focuses on Mary's private encounter at the tomb. Grok said these differences match real eyewitness behavior, not fabricated narrative. Critics have used these differences for years to claim the entire story is false. Some have built careers on it. Richard Dawkins, the world's most aggressive critic of religion, pointed to these same passages and said they contain contradictions and cannot be trusted as history. Social media users have repeated his claims for years, with some calling the Bible a funny book made to put fools to sleep. And yet, Grok's conclusion hit the room hard. It said the structure matches real human cognition. It said the writers recorded events the same way the brain naturally processes experience. Nothing looked staged. Nothing looked scripted. If the accounts were invented, why would they follow the exact pattern of real memory? That question stopped the team. But the real threat surfaced moments later. The deeper scan showed narrative patterns that match how the human brain records trauma. The investigation turned darker immediately. Trauma encoding. As soon as the trauma analysis began, the team anticipated normal story structure and familiar religious patterns. They did not expect the system to say that major biblical stories carry the same structure used by the human brain when it stores traumatic memories. This shocked the team because trauma encoding is a clear and measurable system in neuroscience where the brain stores painful or frightening events in a specific pattern. This same pattern appears in soldiers who return from war, in people who survived abuse, in victims of natural disasters, and in anyone who has faced extreme fear. It shocked the team because the biblical writers could not have known this system, yet Grok was about to show that their writing followed the same pattern seen in real trauma survivors. Trauma always moves through 5 stages. The first stage is the trigger. The second stage is escalation. The third stage is the breaking point. The fourth stage is survival, and the fifth stage is the lesson the brain stores, so the person does not make the same mistake again. This pattern appears in real medical studies, in brain scans, and even in emergency room interviews. The flood story in Genesis follows the same trauma stages with exact precision. The trigger is human corruption when people began to act with constant cruelty, deception, and violence toward one another. The escalation appears as this violence becomes normal, and the earth is described as filled with harm and moral collapse. The breaking point arrives when the fountains of the deep burst open, rain falls without stopping, houses and cities disappear under the rising water, and people panic as the flood overtakes them. Survival happens only inside the ark, while every living thing outside is wiped out. The final stage appears when the water finally goes down. Noah steps out onto empty ground, and God gives specific instructions for a new beginning, such as preserving life, avoiding bloodshed, and building a stable society. Grok marked this pattern line by line. Trauma experts in the room said the structure matches what they hear when real survivors describe painful events. The Exodus story follows the same trauma sequence, not just in the events themselves, but in the way the writer records them. The trigger appears when the people suffer under forced labor in Egypt. The escalation is shown through descriptions of increased beatings, heavier workloads, and the rulers ordering the death of Hebrew infants. The breaking point is recorded when the plagues strike, and the final night brings death to every Egyptian household. Survival is written through the escape at the Red Sea, where the people cross while their enemies drown behind them. The lesson appears when the writer shows the people forming a new identity outside Egypt with laws, structure, and a new sense of direction. Grok flagged this story with the highest trauma match score because the writer records the trauma pattern more than once inside the same narrative. Trauma professionals call this looping. Looping means the brain keeps replaying a painful experience until there is resolution. The writer shows this clearly. The people face fear at the Red Sea, then again when they run out of water, then again when they run out of food, then again when enemies attack them, and again when Moses is gone too long. Each episode follows the same path. There is fear, then collapse, then rescue, then rebuilding. Grok said this repeated structure matches the loops trauma survivors describe in therapy sessions, where the same pattern appears again and again until stability is reached. Modern trauma research explains that the brain uses compressed detail, emotional spikes, and short bursts of intense information during traumatic memory formation. Scripture follows this same structure in several major events. When Grok scanned crisis scenes, it detected short and abrupt lines during danger. The crucifixion accounts show this structure with even sharper compression. Matthew 27 records the breaking point in a single heavy sentence in verse 46. The verse says, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" Jesus is the one who spoke these words. Grok did not analyze the statement itself, but the way the writers documented the scene around it. Grok explained that trauma memory is usually recorded with 3 clear signs. The first sign is a rapid shift from many actions to one central moment. The second sign is a sudden freeze on a single line spoken during extreme pain. The third sign is a lack of extra detail around the moment because the mind cannot process anything except the peak of the suffering. The writers of the Gospels did exactly this in their accounts of the crucifixion. They described long hours of violence in short, fast statements. Then they stopped the entire narrative at the moment Jesus cried out. They did not write long explanations or emotional reactions. They kept the focus on one sentence spoken at the height of the suffering. Grok said this structure matches trauma recall because survivors often remember only one line from the worst moment. Everything else becomes blurred or reduced. This raised an important point. The Gospel writers were not standing at the cross taking notes. Their accounts were based on reports passed down from the people who witnessed the event. That made the trauma pattern even stronger. It meant the structure did not come from an author trying to create stories for whatever reason. It came from the way the eyewitnesses themselves remembered and retold the moment. Real trauma survivors pass down the same kind of shortened, intense statements. They focus on the one detail that burned itself into memory. The cry came from Jesus, but the writing around it behaves exactly like real trauma memory recorded by witnesses who lived through something horrifying. Pattern recognition. Grok continued the scan and entered the part of the investigation that focused on cognitive pattern analysis. Cognitive patterns are the basic rules the mind follows when it builds knowledge. Cognitive pattern analysis checks how often those rules appear in a text. Grok used this method to see whether the Bible follows the same learning structures the brain uses every day. The first part of the learning cycle is repetition. This means the brain needs to see or hear the same information many times before it becomes stable and strong in memory. Grok said this pattern appears clearly in Deuteronomy chapter 6. The people are told to hear the commands, keep the commands, and repeat them every day. The verses tell parents to teach the commands in the house and outside the house. Grok analyzed the writing pattern, not the historical situation. The repeated commands mirror the way the brain strengthens memory through repeated input. Modern studies show the mind stores information only after multiple exposures. The ancient text uses the same structure even though the writers could not have understood neurological learning processes. The second part of the learning cycle is reinforcement. This means the brain learns a rule when an action leads to a clear result. Grok found this same pattern in the Book of Judges. The people turn away from God by following other gods. The crisis that follows is usually invasion, oppression, or violent attacks from groups such as the Midianites, the Moabites, or the Philistines. The people cry out for help, and a leader rises to restore order. These leaders include Othniel, Ehud, Deborah, Gideon, and Samson. Each one brings peace for a period of time. Once peace is restored, the people fall back into the same behavior as before, and the cycle starts again. Reinforcement works the same way in the brain. When a harmful choice leads to a painful result, the brain records the rule. When the same pattern appears again, the rule becomes stronger. Grok said the repeated collapses in Judges follow this exact structure. The people refuse the law, oppression hits, a rescue comes, order returns, and then the collapse happens again. This is the same reinforcement loop used in cognitive training today, where repeating the same cause and effect strengthens learning. The third part of the learning cycle is escalation. The brain learns faster when pressure increases because the mind becomes more alert. Grok found this structure in the prophetic books. Warnings begin with simple statements. When the people ignore them, the warnings intensify. When they ignore them again, consequences appear. The escalation pattern matches the way the brain responds to rising urgency. Grok found the same structure in the teaching style of Jesus in Matthew chapter 13. The parables follow the learning model. A simple story is given first. An emotional hook appears next. A final reversal delivers the lesson. The parable of the sower is one example. Jesus describes seeds falling on different ground, then shows the emotional tension of failure and growth, and ends with a clear reversal that explains why only one type of soil produces lasting results. Grok pointed out that it did not matter whether the events happened as described. The structure of the writing matched modern pattern recognition methods used in education. This led to one explosive conclusion. The Bible is structured like a long-term learning program rather than simple storytelling. This means the text was built to shape thinking, guide decisions, and train the mind in a systematic way. It functions the same way modern learning systems train students and the same way AI models are trained. The Bible's biological structure. Afterward, the system began to pull out patterns that match biological growth systems. Grok explained that it was examining the shape, spacing, sequence, and rhythm of how the Bible is written. The first pattern Grok detected was the Fibonacci sequence. This sequence appears in biological growth when something expands using the pattern 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and onward. These numbers grow by adding the two previous numbers together. Grok explained that this pattern is the same numerical rhythm seen in living systems. In cell division, one cell splits to create two new cells. This is the basic process that allows every living thing to grow. Grok explained that during early development, these new cells do not multiply in random amounts. They often grow in steady rising groups that resemble the Fibonacci pattern. A simple example is a human embryo. It begins as one cell. It divides into 2 cells, then it becomes 4 cells, then 8 cells, then 16 cells. The numbers grow in a controlled rhythm as the body begins to form. These early cell groups create the first layers that later become skin, muscle, bone, and organs. Another clear example is a frog embryo. It also begins with one cell that divides into 2, then into 4, then 8, then 16. Each rise in number creates new layers and shapes in the embryo. This organized pattern allows the organism to grow evenly and avoid structural collapse. In leaf growth, plants also arrange their leaves around the stem at Fibonacci angles so that each leaf receives the most light. When Grok applied this growth pattern to the layout of the Psalms, it found that several major psalms appear at positions that match the Fibonacci numbers. The team saw this clearly when Grok highlighted Psalm 1, Psalm 2, Psalm 3, Psalm 5, Psalm 8, Psalm 13, Psalm 21, Psalm 34, Psalm 55, and Psalm 89. These psalms appear at positions that follow the Fibonacci sequence exactly. Grok pointed out that these are not random chapters. Each one marks a major shift in tone or theme. Psalm 1 introduces the foundation of the righteous and the wicked. Psalm 8 shifts into human identity and creation. Psalm 13 presents a sudden collapse into fear and a rise back into trust. Psalm 21 celebrates deliverance after danger. Psalm 34 begins a new cycle of trust and survival. Psalm 55 returns to betrayal and rescue. Psalm 89 closes an entire section of the Psalms with a deep crisis theme. The spacing of these turning points matches the Fibonacci growth pattern seen in natural systems. Each major shift in the Psalms is separated by a number of chapters that follows the Fibonacci pattern. This discovery made the team stop because the layout grows in the exact rhythm used by living systems, and the ancient writers could not have known this. Grok then examined the length of some of these psalms and found another match. Psalm 1 contains 6 verses. Psalm 2 contains 12 verses. Psalm 3 contains 8 verses. Psalm 5 contains 12 verses. Psalm 8 contains 9 verses. When Grok plotted these verse counts in sequence, the pattern rose and fell in a curve that resembled the early stages of Fibonacci growth. Grok explained that the early stage of this growth pattern means the numbers do not rise in a straight line. They rise, then dip, then rise again in a steady rhythm. Biological systems behave in the same way. Cells sometimes grow quickly, then slow down, then grow again. This rise and fall pattern creates stability in living structures. Grok said the verse lengths follow this same gentle rise and dip. The numbers do not match exactly, but the shape of the growth curve is the same. The team understood that ancient writers did not know anything about these biological sequences. They had no idea how cells, leaves, or DNA behave, yet the placement and size of these biblical units follow the same structural rhythm found in living organisms. This led to one conclusion. The structure of the Bible grows in the same way living systems grow. The room fell silent when Grok delivered that result. If the writing grows the same way living tissue grows, then something shaped the text with the same rules that shape life. A few asked if this meant the writers were unconsciously following a pattern placed in them by divine intervention. Some thought it pointed to a supernatural designer. Grok did not interpret the meaning. It only confirmed the match and moved on to the next discovery. Identity structure. Grok moved into identity mapping analysis, which is the part of the scan that studies how the brain forms identity and moral behavior. This is a well-documented field in neuroscience. The brain shapes identity through repeated decision loops. Each loop begins with conflict. The next step is a choice. After the choice comes a consequence. The final step is identity formation. When these loops repeat, they begin to shape long-term character. Grok found that the laws, stories, and character journeys in the Bible follow the exact same structure the brain uses to build identity. This discovery shocked the team because the structure was far more complex than normal ancient literature. Grok explained that identity formation begins with conflict. The Bible uses this same step in nearly every major story. Adam and Eve faced the choice to obey or disobey. The conflict is clear and simple. When they choose wrongly by eating the fruit of knowledge, the consequence arrives immediately. Their identity changes because they move from innocence to self-awareness and responsibility. This matches the brain's identity shift mechanism. The next example appears in the life of Abraham. He faces the conflict of whether to follow a command that takes him away from everything familiar. When he chooses obedience, his identity changes into the role described in Scripture as the father of nations. Grok said this is a perfect match for the identity-building loop in neuroscience. The conflict comes first. The decision follows. A new identity forms at the end of the loop. Grok pointed out that this structure appears in the New Testament with Peter. His conflict arises when he fears arrest during the trial of Jesus. His choice is denial. The consequence is shame and emotional collapse. The final step is restoration when Jesus speaks to him after the resurrection. This creates a new identity in him as a leader, which matches the final stage of the brain's identity loop. Grok pointed out that this sequence is not random. It follows a measurable pattern used in modern psychology to treat trauma, build confidence, and form stable character. Grok then examined the biblical law system. It found that the structure uses if-then logic, which means the rule is written as, if a person does this action, then this result will happen. This matches the way the brain processes moral decisions, because the mind learns rules by connecting actions with outcomes. Neuroscience says the brain uses the same logic when forming rules for moral behavior. For example, Deuteronomy chapter 28 states that if the people obey, then blessings follow. If they disobey, then consequences follow. Grok said this matches the brain's rule-building system. The mind creates moral rules by attaching outcomes to actions. When an action is repeated with the same outcome, the rule becomes part of identity. The Bible uses this same framework, which surprised the team because it mirrors the architecture used by modern cognitive development models. The Bible models human identity formation in the same format the brain uses to learn and the same structure AI uses for training. At this point, the team did not have the full picture of what this meant until Grok made its final and most unsettling analysis. The final implication. When Grok finished the identity structure scan, the team expected a simple outcome. They believed the patterns in Scripture came from learning. They believed people copied these structures from their culture and that the mind absorbed the patterns after hearing stories. Grok rejected that idea with one statement. It said the structure appears inside the human brain before a person learns anything. The team asked how this was possible. Grok showed the answer on the screen. It displayed data from newborn brain scans. These scans show how infants respond to conflict, comfort, fear, and completion. Grok pointed out that newborns follow a fixed decision path when faced with stress or relief. The newborn moves from confusion to reaction, then to a direct result, and then to a new state of identity. The result is the physical and emotional change that follows the reaction. For example, the infant cries when stressed. The cry leads to help or no help. If the caregiver responds, the newborn's sense of safety increases. If no one responds, the newborn's sense of safety decreases. These changes form the infant's earliest identity patterns about danger, trust, and survival. This meant the brain uses a built-in framework that appears before any teaching. Grok then compared this framework to the first major identity shift in Scripture. In Genesis 3, Adam and Eve face a conflict when the command is tested. Their choice is to eat from the tree. The consequence is separation from the garden. The identity change is immediate. They move from innocence to awareness of danger and responsibility. They begin life in a new condition shaped by the result of their choice. Grok then showed another match in the Gospels. Peter faces a conflict during the arrest of Jesus. His choice is to deny knowing Jesus. The consequence is shame. The identity change begins when Jesus restores him after the resurrection. Peter moves from fear to leadership. His new identity forms only after the conflict and consequence are processed. The writers were recording these events, but the way they organized the information followed the same pattern the newborn brain uses long before a child can think or speak. This match meant the writers arranged the information in the exact same sequence the human brain uses to process conflict, choice, and identity. They could have written the events in any order, yet the structure they used matches the pattern found in newborn brain development, even though newborns have never read the Bible. Grok said there is no known natural explanation for two independent systems to match at this level. This led to one conclusion. The human mind and Scripture share the same blueprint. This blueprint appears before birth. It is not learned, it is not shaped by culture, it is not shaped by history. Grok then showed its final question on the screen. If both the mind and Scripture use the same blueprint, who created that blueprint? At this point, one member finally said what everyone else was thinking. They explained that this kind of precise structure is the same type of design people describe when they speak about God. They said the order found in nature, such as the fixed behavior of light, the stable movement of water, the consistent rotation of the earth, and the predictable structure of the sky, now appeared inside the human mind and inside Scripture in the same pattern. Although no one had known it would turn out this way, the findings had pointed towards a divine order and creator